"Get out, now!" Dashiell shouted, running toward the woman. The audience stood up, confused. Amara, trembling, stopped in the middle of the stage with her hands raised. "She hasn't done anything!" someone screamed from the audience. But it was too late. Dashiell was already 2 steps away from her. Then a calm voice cut through the chaos. "Let her be." André Rieu'S appeared among the musicians, walking slowly toward the woman. He observed her in silence for long seconds. The woman cried without sound, holding her breath. André simply extended his hand, and at that moment, the entire audience forgot they were at a concert. What happened next, no one could forget. That afternoon in Boston seemed to announce something special. Boston Common was packed for André Rieu'S free concert, a special event organized to raise donations for victims of international conflicts. Thousands of people had gathered, families with children, elderly folks with folding chairs, young people with smartphones ready to capture every moment. The atmosphere was festive, full of anticipation. No one could have predicted what would happen. But Amara wasn't there for the music. She stood 3 streets away, her back against the cold wall of the refugee shelter, listening to the distant sounds of the orchestra rehearsal. The building behind her was called Northern Light Community Center, a modest structure with peeling paint and cracked windows. 18 young refugees lived there, crammed into rooms originally meant for half that number. The days there were all the same. Wake at sunrise, eat stale bread with lukewarm tea that tasted more like water. Wait for hours for news about asylum applications that never seemed to come, and then sleep again on thin mattresses that couldn't block the cold from the floor. No one knew where Amara went every afternoon. Not even Sloan, the nurse who came 3 times a week to check the residents for illnesses, injuries, or the subtle signs of mental deterioration she saw too often. She had tried to approach Amara, but the woman never spoke more than 3 words a day. Her eyes were always distant, as if she were somewhere else, in a time and place only she could see. What no one knew was that Amara went every afternoon to an abandoned rehearsal room behind the public library. It was a small, dusty space full of forgotten instruments that no one wanted anymore. In the corner lay a violin, old and heavily damaged, with a crack in the sound box and strings that broke regularly. But for Amara, it was the most beautiful instrument in the world. She played it when no one was listening, when the world forgot about her, when she could pretend her father was still standing beside her, correcting her with that soft, patient voice she missed so much it hurt to breathe. Her father, Ellison, had been a violinist in a small orchestra in Aleppo, not famous, not wealthy, but dedicated to his art in a way that Amara had always admired. Every evening after work, Ellison had picked up his violin and played until his fingers ached. And every evening he had let Amara listen, had taught her about melodies and harmonies, about the way music could say what words could not. When the conflict escalated, everything changed. Their home became unsafe. The orchestra stopped performing. Music became a luxury no one could afford. One night, when the sound of explosions came closer than ever, Ellison had woken Amara. He had given her a torn piece of paper, full of handwritten musical notes. "If something happens to me," he had whispered, his voice trembling but determined, "play this, and someone will listen, I promise you." That was the last time Amara had seen her father as he was. The man who came back afterward was quieter, more fearful, broken in ways Amara didn't understand. And then one morning he was simply gone. No goodbye, no explanation. Only the silence and the torn paper that Amara now always carried in her pocket. The journey to America had been long and dangerous. Amara remembered the boat crossing, the cold water, the screaming people. She remembered the camps, the bureaucracy, the endless questions from officials who looked at her as if she were a problem to be solved. And she remembered the day she arrived at the refugee shelter, looking at the other residents who were just as lost as she was. One afternoon, about 2 months after her arrival, Sloan was getting a small black bag from her car when she saw something fall from Amara's jacket. It was a yellowed piece of paper, folded and refolded until it was almost falling apart. She picked it up to return it, but before she could hand it back, she saw the name written in the corner, Ellison. "Is this yours?" she had asked, holding the paper. Amara had snatched it from her hands, her face suddenly full of panic. "Don't touch," she had mumbled, her first complete sentence in weeks. "I'm sorry," Sloan had said, her hands up in a gesture of peace. "I just wanted to help." But Amara had already turned and walked inside, the paper pressed against her chest as if it were her only connection to everything she had lost. Sloan had lain awake for a long time that night, thinking about that name, Ellison. It seemed familiar, but she couldn't place why. It wasn't until days later, when she was going through old family photos, that she remembered. Her brother, the brother she had lost when she fled Syria 20 years ago. The brother who had been a violinist. The brother named Ellison. But that couldn't be. That would be too coincidental, too impossible. She decided not to ask. Not yet. First, She had to be sure. That evening, when the concert was about to begin, Amara disappeared from the shelter. No one saw her leave. She waited until everyone was busy with dinner, slipped through the side door, and ran through the alleys toward Boston Common. Her heart pounded in her chest, not from exertion, but from something else, a feeling she couldn't name. An urge to be closer to the music, to feel what her father had felt when he played for an audience. The Common was overwhelming. So many people, so much noise, so much life. Amara felt small and invisible, exactly as she wanted to be. She squeezed through the crowd, navigating between bodies and bags until she found a spot on the side of the stage where security was less strict. There, in the shadow of the technical equipment, she crouched down and watched as the musicians tuned their instruments. Merritt, the sound technician, was busy with final sound checks when he saw movement in his peripheral vision. He turned and saw a woman, young and thin, staring at the stage with an intensity that felt uncomfortable. Merritt frowned. There were always fans who got too close, too pushy, but this woman was different. She didn't look like a fan. She looked like she was searching for something. "Hey, you there," Merritt called. "You can't be here. Audience stays behind the barriers." Amara heard him but didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the violins, standing on racks next to the stage. They were beautiful, gleaming, perfectly maintained, nothing like her own damaged instrument, and at that moment, without thinking, without planning, Amara stood up and climbed onto the stage. It happened so fast that no one could react. 1 second she wasn't there. The next second she was standing in the middle of the stage, surrounded by astonished musicians and an audience that suddenly fell silent. "What are you doing?" Merritt shouted, his hand already reaching for his radio to call security. Amara said nothing. She couldn't. Her mouth was dry, her hands were trembling, her legs felt like they would give out, but in her pocket, she felt the torn paper, and that gave her just enough strength to stay upright. The audience began to murmur. Some thought it was part of the show. Others understood that something was wrong. Parents pulled their children closer. Young people started filming. And then, from the side of the stage, Dashiell appeared. He was the head of security for the event, a man who took his job seriously. Too seriously, some said. For him, rules were non-negotiable. And rule number 1 was, no one comes on stage without permission. "Get out now," he shouted, his voice cutting through the murmur. He ran toward Amara, his hand already extended to grab her by the arm and drag her off the stage. The audience stood up, some shouting, others watching in shocked silence. A woman called out, "She hasn't done anything, leave her alone." But Dashiell wasn't listening. For him, this was a security risk. For him, Amara was an intruder who needed to be removed. Amara saw him coming. Her first instinct was to run, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. Instead, she did something she hadn't planned. She pulled the torn paper from her pocket and held it up, as if that would explain everything, as if that would be enough. Dashiell stopped, mere inches away from her. He looked at the paper, then at the woman, and saw for the first time the tears in her eyes. Not tears of fear, but something deeper: grief, loss, desperation. And then, before Dashiell could decide what to do, a voice rang out. "Let her be." It wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise like a knife through butter. Everyone stopped. Everyone turned around. André Rieu'S stood there at the side of the stage, his violin in his hand. He had seen everything from backstage. He had seen the woman climb, had seen Dashiell run, had felt the panic in the audience. And now, as he walked forward, slowly and deliberately, he felt something he couldn't explain. A recognition, a connection. "Mr. Rieu'S," Dashiell began, "this woman doesn't have permission to—" "I said let her be," André repeated, his voice kind but unwavering. Dashiell hesitated. He looked at his colleagues, at the audience, at the woman, and then, against all his training, he took a step back. André walked toward Amara. The Common was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop. Thousands of eyes watched as the famous violinist and the unknown woman looked at each other. "What is that?" André asked softly, pointing to the paper in Amara's hands. Amara couldn't answer. Her throat was tight. Her thoughts a chaos of fear and hope, and something she didn't dare name. André extended his hand. "May I?" After a long hesitation, Amara gave him the paper. André unfolded it carefully, as if it could fall apart at any moment. And when he saw the handwritten musical notes, the unfinished melody, the small symbol in the corner, his eyes narrowed. He had seen that symbol before, years ago, in another country, in another time. "Where did you get this?" André asked, his voice now somewhat more urgent. "My father," Amara whispered, the first words she had spoken since climbing onto the stage. "Your father," André repeated. "What was his name?" "Ellison." And at that moment, everything changed. André felt his heart skip a beat. Ellison, that name. He knew that name. Years ago, after a concert in Jordan, A young man had approached him. He had been shy but determined, had waited until all the other fans had left before stepping forward. He had introduced himself as Ellison, a violinist in a local orchestra in Syria. They had talked for hours that night, about music, about dreams, about the power of art to connect people even in the most difficult times. Before they said goodbye, Ellison had given André a small wooden medallion with a symbol engraved on it. "This is a sign of friendship," he had said. "If you ever meet someone who carries this symbol, know that they are family." André still had that medallion somewhere at home in a drawer with other memories, and now, here on this stage in Boston, he was staring at the same symbol drawn in the corner of this torn paper. "Your father was Ellison," André said slowly, more a statement than a question. "The violinist from Aleppo." Amara nodded, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. The audience watched breathlessly. No one fully understood what was happening, but everyone felt it was important. Rieu'S, the journalist standing on the right side of the stage, zoomed in with her camera. Her hands trembled slightly as she captured every second. This was no ordinary news item anymore. This was something else, something people needed to see. André looked at the paper, then at the woman, then at his own musicians who all stood frozen, waiting to see what would happen. "Merritt!" André called without taking his eyes off Amara. "Give me my violin." Merritt, still confused by everything that was happening, hesitated only a moment before taking André's instrument and carefully handing it over. André took it, quickly tuned 3 strings with the skill of someone who had done it thousands of times, and positioned it under his chin. "This melody," he said to Amara. "Your father wrote it for you, didn't he?" "He never finished it," Amara answered, her voice barely audible. "He said I would understand when the time came." André nodded, as if that explained everything, and then, without further preamble, he began to play. The first notes floated across the common, soft and hesitant, as if searching for their way. André wasn't playing from sheet music, but from intuition, his fingers following what the torn paper suggested, but also improvising where the composition was unfinished. It was a strange melody, heartbreaking and hopeful at the same time, full of a pain that André could feel even without the full context. Amara stood frozen. This was the melody from her dreams, the music she had heard so often in her head but could never perfectly recreate. And now it sounded real and alive, played by someone who understood it in a way she hadn't thought possible. Tears blurred her vision, her knees buckled, and before she knew what she was doing, she walked to the stand where the second violin stood. Her hands, which hadn't played in public for months, reached out and took the instrument. It was heavier than her old violin, better balanced, with strings that were tight and perfectly tuned. She placed it under her chin exactly as her father had taught her. For a moment she hesitated, afraid to fail, afraid to ruin the moment. But then she looked at André, who nodded encouragingly, and she began to play. The first notes were uncertain, shrill and out of time, but André adjusted his tempo, waited for her, gently led her back to the melody, and slowly, very slowly, Amara found her rhythm. Her fingers remembered the patterns, her arm remembered the movement, and suddenly she was no longer on a stage in Boston. She was home, in their small living room in Aleppo, playing next to her father, while the sun shone through the window and everything was right with the world. The audience was silent as the grave. Thousands of people literally held their breath as they witnessed something they didn't quite understand, but felt deeply. Elderly people had tears in their eyes. Young people lowered their phones, too moved to keep filming, and somewhere in the crowd stood a woman with her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. It was Sloane. She had run as soon as she heard what was happening. She had fought through the crowd, been pushed away by security, screamed that she knew the woman, and now she stood there, looking at Amara on stage, and she knew for certain this was Ellison's daughter, her niece, family she had thought lost forever. The melody reached a climax, both violins now in perfect harmony, building toward something greater and more powerful. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. The last note held on, trembling in the air, before slowly fading into silence. No one moved, no one spoke. It was as if the entire city was holding its breath. And then the applause began. It started small, a few hands here and there, but it grew quickly. It swelled like a wave, amplifying until it became thunderous, until it was palpable in the ground beneath their feet. People stood up, some crying, others cheering. Strangers embraced each other, and in the midst of all that stood André and Amara, still holding their violins, looking at each other with an understanding that needed no words. But the peace was short-lived. From the side of the common came a group of about 20 people. They carried banners with slogans on them, "America First" and "No Illegals on Our Stages." Their faces were hard, their voices loud. They had heard what had happened, had seen it on social media that was already going viral, and they weren't happy. "This is our culture," a man at the front shouted. This isn't her place. Others took over, chanting, shouting, trying to override the musical emotion that still hung in the air. Dashiell, who had been watching from the side, knew he had to intervene. He signaled to his team, and within seconds, they formed a human chain between the stage and the approaching demonstrators. "Stop!" Dashiell called, his voice authoritative. "This is a peaceful event. If you're here to cause trouble, I'll have you removed." But the demonstrators didn't stop. They pushed against the chain, tried to break through, their anger escalating. On stage, Amara felt the panic returning. This was exactly what she had feared. She had caused trouble. She had made people angry. She had ruined everything. "I have to go," she said to André, already putting her violin back on the stand. "I'm sorry. I never should have." "Stay," André said firmly, his hand on Amara's shoulder. "You've done nothing wrong." "But they don't understand. Not yet, but they will." André turned to the microphone standing in the middle of the stage. He picked it up, and his voice filled the common, drowning out the demonstrators, demanding everyone's attention. "Listen to me," he began, his voice calm but powerful. "Today, something extraordinary happened. This young woman, Amara, climbed onto this stage not out of audacity or attention-seeking. She climbed on it because music called her, because her father, a man I once met and respected, taught her that music transcends borders." He paused, let his words sink in. "Some of you are angry. You think this doesn't belong? That our culture must be protected? And I understand that, but let me ask you this. What is culture? Is it a wall we build to keep others out? Or is it a bridge we build to reach each other?" The demonstrators had fallen silent, though their faces were still hard. "This woman," André continued, pointing to Amara, "stole nothing. She damaged nothing. She only shared music. And if we can't make room for that, then I don't know what we can make room for anymore." The audience applauded loud and long, but the demonstrators remained, their arms crossed, their eyes full of doubt. Rieu'S filmed everything, knew this was a story bigger than one concert, bigger than one woman. This was a moment that defined America, that showed who they wanted to be as a nation. And somewhere in the crowd, Sloane pushed forward, desperate to get to Amara, to tell her what she had discovered, to explain everything. But the crowd was too dense, too chaotic. She was stuck, forced to just watch as everything unfolded. On stage, Amara saw the demonstrators, felt their anger, and something in her broke. This was too much, too overwhelming. She had only wanted to play, to honor her father, and now she was the center of something she didn't understand. Without saying anything more, without even looking at André, she ran off the stage. She jumped from the edge, landed awkwardly, and disappeared into the crowd before anyone could stop her. "Amara," André called, but it was too late. The woman was gone. Hours later, Sloane sat on the steps outside the refugee shelter, her head in her hands, her phone continuously vibrating with messages from friends who had seen the video. She had searched everywhere, walked through the streets, called Amara's name, stopped at every place she might go, but Amara was nowhere to be found. She had disappeared, locked in herself, as she had done so often since her arrival. The door behind her opened. It was Merritt, who had followed her from the common. "Still nothing?" he asked softly. Sloane shook her head, tears burning behind her eyes. "She's scared. She thinks she's ruined everything. And I should have told her. I should have told her that Ellison was my brother. Maybe that would have helped. Maybe then she wouldn't have felt so alone." Merritt sat down next to her. "You can't go back in time. You can only go forward." "But where is forward?" Sloane asked, her voice broken. "She's out there somewhere alone, thinking no one cares about her." At that moment, a car stopped in front of the building. André Rieu'S stepped out, followed by Dashiell. They had consulted together after the concert, trying to understand what had happened and what they could do to make it right. "Ma'am," André said as he walked up the steps, "you're the nurse who cares for Amara." Sloane stood up, quickly wiping her eyes. "Yes, I'm Sloane, and you're André Rieu'S, and this is Dashiell. We need to find Amara. I've searched everywhere," Sloane said, her voice desperate. "She could be anywhere. There's something you should know," André said. He pulled the torn paper from his pocket. "This melody, it was written by Amara's father, a man I once met, a man who told me about his daughter and about his dream that his daughter would continue making music, no matter what happened." Sloane stared at the paper, then at André. "Ellison he was my brother." André's eyes widened. "Your brother?" "I left him 20 years ago," Sloane explained, the words now flowing as if a dam had burst. "I had to flee. It became too dangerous. And I never knew what happened to him. Never knew if he had a family, if he was still playing, if he was still alive." Her voice broke on the last word. "And then I saw that paper," she continued, "and I saw his handwriting, and I knew, but I didn't dare ask. I didn't dare believe it could be true." André placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry for your loss, but Amara," Sloane said, more urgently now. She doesn't know. She doesn't know she has family here. She thinks she's completely alone. Then we need to find her, Dashiell said firmly, and tell her the truth. They divided the city into sectors. André took the western part, Dashiell the eastern, Sloane the center. Merritt coordinated from the shelter, using technical skills to try to trace Amara through any possible digital footprint, but hours passed without result. Meanwhile, in an abandoned parking garage on the edge of the city, Amara sat curled up in a corner, her arms wrapped around her knees. She had turned off her phone, didn't want to hear anyone, didn't want to see anyone. Everything hurt. Her head, her heart, her entire body felt like it was falling apart. She thought about the stage, about the faces in the crowd, about the demonstrators who shouted that she didn't belong, and she thought about her father, about the last time they had spoken, about the promise she had made to keep the music alive. "I'm sorry, Papa," she whispered in the empty garage. "I failed." But then she heard something. Footsteps. Someone had entered the garage. Amara crawled deeper into her corner, tried to be invisible, but the footsteps came closer, purposeful, as if they knew exactly where she was. "Amara," a voice called. It was Rieu'S. She didn't answer, held her breath. "I know you're there," Rieu'S continued, her voice soft but determined, "and I'm not here to bother you. I'm here to listen." Slowly, Amara emerged from her corner, her face cautiously visible in the dim light. Rieu'S walked toward her, slowly, hands visible, no sudden movements. "May I sit with you?" Amara nodded, too exhausted to protest. She sat down next to her, not too close, respecting her space. For a long time they said nothing. They just sat there in the silence, surrounded by the echoes of the empty garage. Eventually Rieu'S spoke. "You didn't do anything wrong, you know that?" "I did everything wrong," Amara mumbled. "I climbed on stage without permission. I made people angry. You expressed yourself," Rieu'S interrupted gently, "and that's never wrong." Amara shook her head. "You don't understand. Those people, they don't want me here. They think I don't belong." "Some people think that," Rieu'S admitted, "but not everyone. Did you see the audience? Thousands of people were moved by what you did. Thousands of people saw your humanity, your talent, your pain." She pulled out her phone, showed her the video. Thousands of comments, most positive, supportive, asking where they could help. "See?" Rieu'S said. "You've touched more people than you realize." Amara looked at the screen, her eyes widening as she read the messages. People from all over America, some even international, who supported her, who wanted to hear her story, who wanted to help. "But the others," she began. "Will always be there," Rieu'S said. "Fear and anger are louder than love, but that doesn't mean they're stronger. You saw what André did today. He chose your side, and he's not the only one." At that moment, both their phones vibrated. It was a message from Merritt. "Found her. Parking garage North Street. Come quickly." Within minutes, André, Sloane, and Dashiell arrived. They ran into the garage, their footsteps echoing. When Sloane saw Amara, she gave a cry of relief. She ran to her, fell to her knees before her, grabbed her hands. Never disappear like that again," she said, tears streaming. "Do you understand me?" Amara looked at her, confused by the intensity of her reaction. "I'm sorry," she mumbled. "I didn't mean to—" "There's something I need to tell you," Sloane interrupted. Her voice trembled. "Something I should have said a long time ago." She took a deep breath. "Your father, Ellison, he was my brother. That makes you my niece. You're not alone. You have me. You have family here." The words hung in the air. Amara stared at her, processing what she had just heard. "Family?" she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "Family," Sloane confirmed, a smile breaking through her tears. "I'm your aunt, and I've been searching for you all this time without knowing you were so close." Amara burst into sobs. All the emotion she had bottled up, all the pain and loneliness and fear, came out in a wave. Sloane pulled her into an embrace, held her while she cried, her own tears mixing with hers. André, Dashiell, Rieu'S, and Merritt watched, all moved by the moment. This was more than a reunion. This was healing. After what seemed like an eternity but was only minutes, Amara pulled back, wiped her face. I didn't know. I thought I was completely alone." "You never were," Sloane said firmly, "and you never will be. Not as long as I live." André stepped forward. "There's something else," he said. He pulled an old photo from his wallet. It was faded, the edges creased, but the image was clear. A younger André, standing next to a younger Ellison, both smiling after a concert. "Your father and I," André explained. "We only met once, but that meeting meant more to me than you can imagine. He told me about his dreams, about you, about the music he wanted to pass on, and he gave me this." He showed Amara the wooden medallion, the same symbol that was on the torn paper. "He told me that if I ever met someone with this symbol, I should know they were family. Not by blood, perhaps, but by something more powerful, by music, by shared dreams. Amara touched the medallion, her fingers tracing over the carved symbol. He never told me about that. Maybe he wanted to keep it as a surprise, André said with a soft smile. Or maybe he knew the moment would reveal itself when the time was right. Dashiell cleared his throat. I want to say something too. Everyone looked at him. Amara, I'm sorry for how I reacted on stage. I was just doing my job, but I didn't see you. I only saw a rule being broken, and that was wrong. You did what you had to do, Amara said softly. No, Dashiell said firmly. I did what was easy. What I should have done was listen, ask, understand, and in that I failed. But I promise you, that won't happen again. Rieu'S stepped forward. I've published your story, the real story, not the sensationalism, and people are responding. They want to help. Donations are pouring in for the shelter. Musicians are offering free lessons. Families are offering housing. Why? Amara asked, still struggling to believe it. Why would they care about me? Because you made them feel something, Rieu'S answered. In a world full of ugliness and division, you made them feel beauty, connection, hope. And people hunger for that, more than you know, André nodded. And that's why I want to offer you something. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. I've established a foundation for young musicians who've lost everything but not their passion. And I want you to be the first. He gave the envelope to Amara. Open it. With trembling hands, Amara opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. Official and stamped. It was a scholarship, fully paid, to a music academy in New York. Housing included. Instruments included, everything she would need to develop her talent. I can't accept this, Amara stammered. It's too much. It's not enough, André corrected. Your father would have wanted you to have this chance, and now you have it. But only if you want it. Amara looked at the letter, then at Sloane, then at all the faces around her. All these people, all touched by her story in some way, all wanting to help. I don't know, she said honestly. I don't know if I'm good enough. No one is at the beginning, André said. But that's not the point. The point is that you try, that you live the music, that you honor your father's legacy by becoming who you're meant to be. Sloane took Amara's hand. And whatever happens, you're not alone. I'll be there. We'll all be there. Amara looked at the letter again, read the words once more, let them sink in. A chance, a real chance. After everything she had been through, after all the loss and pain, here was something new, something hopeful. Slowly, very slowly, she nodded. Okay, she whispered. I'll try. The collective sigh of relief was almost palpable. Sloane hugged her again. André smiled broadly. Even Dashiell, usually so serious, allowed a small grin. Then, André said, let's start making plans. The following days were a blur of activity. Sloane arranged paperwork, ensured Amara's residency status was regularized with help from lawyers who worked pro bono after hearing her story. André organized meetings with teachers from the music academy, made sure Amara would get the best possible guidance. Dashiell, in an unexpected turn, offered to become Amara's unofficial protector, a kind of mentor who could help her navigate the bureaucratic and social complexities of her new life. But amidst all the preparation, something happened that no one had expected. Merritt, who in his free time had done more research into Ellison's background, discovered an old storage unit registered in Ellison's name at a facility on the outskirts of Aleppo. Thanks to international contacts and some creative networking, he managed to have the contents transferred to America. It took weeks, full of bureaucratic obstacles and unexpected delays, but eventually a small box arrived at the shelter. Sloane called Amara immediately. Something has arrived, something from your father. They met at the shelter, along with André, who had insisted on being present. The box was small, no bigger than a shoebox, sealed with tape that seemed years old. Amara stared at it as if it could explode at any moment. Do you want me to open it? Sloane asked softly. Amara shook her head. No, I have to do it. With trembling hands, she broke the seal and opened the box. Inside lay a few items, an old music book, some family photos, and a sealed envelope with Amara's name written on it in her father's handwriting. Amara picked up the envelope, her breath catching. This was her father's handwriting, the same style as on the torn paper, but clearer, more careful. Do you want to read it alone? André asked. No, Amara said after a moment. Stay, please. She opened the envelope and pulled out a letter, several pages long, dated years ago. She began to read, first silently but soon aloud, her voice trembling with each word. My dear Amara, if you're reading this, I'm probably no longer with you. That thought breaks my heart in ways I can't describe. But I want you to know something. Even in my absence, I'm with you. In every note you play, in every melody you create, I live on. Music isn't just sound, my daughter. It's a language that speaks when words fail. It's a bridge that connects people across borders, across time. And you carry that in you, you always have. Continuando do parágrafo que foi cortado. I remember the first time I saw you hold a violin. You were only 5 years old, and the instrument was almost bigger than you. But the way you looked at it, with so much wonder and respect, I knew in that moment that you had something special. If you ever meet André Rieu'S, and I fervently hope you will, tell him this. Thank you for inspiring me. That one evening in Jordan after your concert, when we talked about dreams and about the power of art, that was one of the most beautiful evenings of my life. You reminded me why I became a violinist. Not for fame or money, but for the pure joy of creating, of feeling, of connecting. And now through you, my daughter will learn the same lesson. She will understand that music needs no passport, no status, no permission. It only asks for an open heart and the courage to play, even when the world is silent. Don't be afraid, Amara. Don't be afraid to fail, to make mistakes, to show yourself. That fear is the greatest enemy of creativity. Play with your whole heart. Live with your whole soul. And know that I'm always proud of you. Love music, my daughter, and let music love you, your father, Ellison. By the time Amara finished reading, tears were streaming down her face. Sloane was crying too, her hand over her mouth. André turned away, his own eyes moist. He knew, Amara whispered. He knew we would meet. He knew, he believed, André corrected softly. He believed in the power of connection, in the idea that people who are meant to find each other eventually will. And he was right. Amara looked at the other items in the box. The music book contained compositions her father had written, some finished, others fragmentary. The photos showed their family, happier times, moments that felt like they came from another life. I want to create something, Amara said suddenly, her voice stronger now. Something to honor him, not just by playing his music, but by creating something new, something that continues his legacy, but also lets my own voice be heard. Then, André said with a smile, let's begin. The following weeks, Amara and André worked together on a new composition. It was a collaboration, blending Ellison's unfinished melodies with new themes Amara had developed. It was challenging, emotionally exhausting, but also incredibly rewarding. Sloane came often, brought food, listened to their progress, offered support when Amara struggled with difficult passages or emotional blocks. Dashiell arranged a safe space where they could work undisturbed, away from the media attention that still followed Amara. And Rieu'S? She documented it all, not intrusively, but respectfully, capturing the journey of a young woman who was rediscovering herself through music. Meanwhile, support for Amara's story grew. Schools invited her to speak about her experiences. Local orchestras offered to collaborate with her. And a prominent museum in New York asked if they could exhibit Ellison's letter and the torn paper as part of an exhibition on art and resilience in conflict zones. But not everything was positive. The demonstrators still came regularly, albeit in smaller numbers. They picketed outside the shelter, outside the buildings where Amara rehearsed. Their message was still the same. She didn't belong here. She was a threat. She should leave. Amara tried to ignore it, but it was difficult. Every time she heard their voices, she felt the fear returning, the doubt, the feeling that she was somewhere she wasn't welcome. One night, after a particularly difficult day, she sat alone in the rehearsal room, her violin untouched beside her. She felt defeated, exhausted, ready to give up. Sloane found her like that. She sat down next to her, said nothing, just waited. Maybe they're right, Amara said eventually. Maybe I don't belong here. Why do you think that? Sloane asked. Because everywhere I go there are problems. People get angry, there are protests. I only bring conflict. No, Sloane said firmly. You don't bring conflict. You only expose what was already there. Fear, prejudice, ignorance. That's not your fault. That's their choice. But what if? There is no what if, she interrupted. You have just as much right to be here as anyone else. You have just as much right to dream, to create, to live. And no one can take that away from you unless you let them. Amara looked at her, saw the strength in her eyes, the conviction, and slowly she felt something shift inside herself. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was time to stop letting people who didn't know her define who she was. Okay, she said softly. Okay. That night she had a dream. She saw her father standing in an empty concert hall, playing for no one and everyone at the same time. The music was beautiful, heartbreaking, and when Ellison finished, he turned and smiled at Amara. Keep playing, he said. Whatever happens, keep playing. Amara woke with tears on her face, but also with a feeling of peace she hadn't felt in months. It was time. Time to let go of her fear and embrace what she was. A musician, a survivor, a bridge between two worlds. 2 months later, a special concert was announced at the prestigious Carnegie Hall in New York. It wasn't an ordinary concert. It was a premiere of Bridges, the composition Amara and André had created together, a work that honored Ellison's legacy while also letting Amara's own voice be heard. Tickets sold out within hours. Media from around the world sent reporters, and backstage, dozens of people worked tirelessly to ensure everything would be perfect. Amara stood backstage, her new violin in her hands, a beautiful instrument that André had arranged for her. It was perfectly balanced, with a rich, warm tone that amazed her every time she played it, but tonight her hands felt heavier than ever. "Nervous?" Sloane asked, coming to stand beside her. "Terrified," Amara admitted. "That's good," she said with a smile. "If you're not nervous, you don't care enough." André appeared, dressed in his formal concert attire. "5 minutes," he announced. "Are you ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Amara answered. They gathered at the side of the stage. Amara could hear the audience, the murmur of voices, the shuffling of feet, the anticipatory energy that rolled through the hall. She took a deep breath, tried to calm her heart, and then it was time. The lights dimmed. The audience fell silent. André walked out first, followed by Amara and the other musicians. The applause was deafening, echoing against the high ceilings of Carnegie Hall. Amara looked out over the sea of faces. She saw Sloane in the front row, tears already in her eyes. She saw Rieu'S with her camera, ready to capture every moment. She saw Dashiell standing at the side, his arms crossed but his face soft with something that looked like pride. And she saw thousands of others, strangers who only knew her through her story, but who had come nonetheless to support her. André took the microphone. "Good evening, everyone. Tonight is a special evening. We're not just presenting a new piece of music, but we're also honoring a legacy, a connection between past and future, between loss and hope." He gestured toward Amara. "This young woman has made a journey that most of us can't imagine. She has lost more than anyone should lose, but she has also retained something that many people lose even without conflicts. She has retained her passion, her dreams, her music." The audience applauded, and Amara felt her cheeks warm. "Bridges was born from a collaboration," André continued. "It combines the vision of Ellison, Amara's father, with Amara's own voice. It's a testament to the idea that art survives death, that creativity is stronger than destruction, that love ultimately wins." He set down the microphone, picked up his violin, and nodded to Amara. "Ready?" Amara nodded, placing her violin under her chin. And then, on André's cue, they began to play. The opening was soft, hesitant, as Ellison's original melody had been, but slowly it grew, evolved, transformed into something new. Amara's parts added layers of complexity, themes of loss, but also of resilience, of darkness, but also of light. The orchestra came in, supporting and elevating the violins. Strings swelled, woodwinds sang, and percussion added a heartbeat that pounded through the entire composition. Amara let herself disappear into the music. For the first time since her father's departure, she felt completely present, completely alive. Every note was a prayer, every phrase a memory, every silence a moment of grief transformed into beauty. The audience was completely silent, breathless, absorbed. Even those who knew nothing about music could feel that something special was happening. This was more than a performance. This was a story, told without words, felt in the deepest part of the heart. When the composition reached its climax, Amara stood alone on stage. The orchestra fell silent, and she played a solo passage she had written especially. It was her message to her father, her way of saying, "I understand now. I understand what you were trying to teach me." Tears streamed down her face as she played, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. This moment was too important, too big. And then finally came the last note. It hung in the air, trembling, before slowly fading into silence. There was no immediate applause. The audience was too overwhelmed, too moved to move. But then, slowly, it began. One person stood up, then another, until the entire hall was standing and applauding, some crying, others cheering. Amara stood there, her violin still in her hands, barely able to believe what she had just done. André came to stand beside her, placed a hand on her shoulder. "Your father would have been so proud," he whispered. "I hope so," Amara answered, her voice broken with emotion. After the concert, a small group gathered backstage. Sloane hugged Amara so hard she almost lost her breath. Rieu'S congratulated her, promised that the documentary she had made would tell her story in a way that respected it. Dashiell shook her hand, something rare given his usual reserve. But the most surprising moment came when an elderly woman stepped forward. She was small, with grey hair and kind eyes, and she wore a jacket that looked like it came from another era. "Amara," she said cautiously, "I don't know if you remember me, but I knew your father. We played together in the orchestra in Aleppo. Amara's eyes widened. You knew him. Very well, she confirmed with a smile. Ellison was one of the most passionate musicians I've ever met. He always talked about you, about his hope that you would share his love for music. I did, Amara said softly. I do. The woman reached into her bag and pulled out an old photo album. I thought you might want to see this. Photos of the orchestra, of your father playing, of better times. Amara took the album, leafed through the pages, saw her father young and happy, surrounded by friends and colleagues. It was a glimpse into a life she had never really known, a reminder of who her father had been before everything changed. Thank you, she said, her voice choked. This means more than you know. Later that evening, when everyone had gone home, Amara and André sat alone in the now empty concert hall. The lights were partially dimmed, giving it the atmosphere of a sanctuary. What now? Amara asked. Everything has happened so fast. I don't even know where I stand anymore. Now, André said thoughtfully, you live. You keep studying. You keep growing. You keep creating. But you do it on your own terms, at your own pace. And if I fail, then you fail, André said with a shrug. But failing doesn't mean stopping. It just means trying again, trying better. Amara nodded, absorbing the words. You know what's strange? Months ago, I just wanted to disappear, to be invisible. And now I feel like I'm finally being seen, really seen. That's because you're letting yourself be seen, André answered. Not the version others want you to be, but the real you. And that's the bravest thing anyone can do. They sat for a while longer in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Eventually, André stood up, patted Amara on the back. It's late. We both need rest. Tomorrow is a new day, and there's still much to do. André? Amara called as the older man walked toward the door. Thank you for everything, André smiled. Don't thank me, you did this yourself. I just opened a door. You were the one who stepped through. In the weeks that followed, Amara settled into her new life. She began classes at the Music Academy in New York, quickly becoming one of the most dedicated students. She moved into a small apartment, not big, but enough, a place she could for the first time in years call her home. Sloane came regularly, brought meals, listened to her progress, offered advice when she needed it. They had hours-long conversations about Ellison, shared stories and memories, built a family history that the conflict had almost destroyed. The foundation André had established grew quickly. Within 6 months, they had helped 50 young musicians, offering not just financial support, but also mentorship and community. Amara became an ambassador, spoke at events, shared her story, inspired others to pursue their own dreams. And the demonstrators? They became fewer, their voices drowned out by the vast majority who supported Amara's story. Some even changed their minds, realized their fear was misplaced, that diversity wasn't something to fear but to celebrate. One afternoon, almost a year after that first concert at Boston Common, Amara returned to the refugee shelter. It was now renovated thanks to donations, with better facilities and more space. The residents who lived there looked healthier, happier, with a glimmer of hope in their eyes that hadn't been there before. She brought her violin, played for them, talked with them, shared her story not to show off but to inspire. You're not just where you come from, she told them. You're also where you're going. Don't let anyone tell you what you can or can't be. The only limit is what you allow yourself to believe. One of the residents, newly arrived and still speaking through a translator, asked, But how do you find the courage? How do you stop being afraid? Amara thought for a moment. You don't stop being afraid, she answered honestly. Fear never completely goes away, but you learn to live with it, to move through it, and you remind yourself that on the other side of fear, possibility waits. That evening, back in her apartment, Amara sat by her window and looked out over New York. The lights of the city sparkled like stars, and somewhere in the distance, she heard music, someone playing piano, the notes drifting through the night. She thought about her father, about everything that had happened, about the journey that had brought her from Aleppo to here. It hadn't been an easy journey, full of pain and loss, but it had also brought her to connections, to family, to a future she hadn't thought possible. She picked up her violin, tuned it, and began to play. Not for an audience, not for fame, but just for herself, for the pure joy of creating, of feeling, of being alive. And as she played, she whispered, This is for you, Papa. The music goes on, always. The years that followed brought more successes. Amara performed in concert halls throughout America and Europe, collaborated with renowned musicians, composed her own works that were critically acclaimed, but she never forgot where she came from, always used her platform to advocate for others who had no voice. She established her own foundation, focused on young refugees who had artistic talent but no means to develop it. She gave masterclasses, mentored, built a network of support that touched thousands of lives. And one day, years later, she received a letter from a young woman from Syria. She wrote that she had heard her story, that it had inspired her to pursue her own dream of becoming a musician. She asked for advice, for guidance, for hope. Amara wrote back, her words echoing what her father had once said to her. Music is a language that speaks when words fail. Let it guide you, heal you, bring you home, and never forget that you're not alone. We're all connected by this universal language of beauty and emotion. One evening, sitting in that same concert hall where she had made her premiere, Amara looked at the torn paper she always carried with her, now framed and protected. It was faded, the edges worn, but the symbol was still clearly visible. Beside her sat her own student, a young woman just as old as Amara had been when she climbed onto that stage. "Tell me about this," the student said, pointing to the paper, and Amara told. She told about her father, about the journey, about the fear and the hope, about the friends who became family, and the strangers who saved her life. "But the most important thing you need to remember," she said as she looked at the student, "is that one moment of courage can change everything. One decision to let yourself be shown, to let yourself be heard, can redefine your entire life." The student nodded, her eyes wider now, filled with a new determination, and so the story continued, passed on through stories, handed down from generation to generation, a testament to the power of music, of resilience, of human connection. Amara played for many more years, her reputation growing, her influence expanding. But what satisfied her most weren't the concerts or the awards. It was the letters from young people thanking her for inspiring them, the stories of lives changed by art, the knowledge that her father's legacy lived on not just through her, but through everyone she touched. And every night before she went to sleep, she looked at that torn paper and smiled, knowing that somewhere, somehow, her father was smiling too, because the music had never stopped. It had only waited for the right moment to be heard again. And now, thanks to one moment of courage and one extended hand, it would go on forever, a bridge between past and future, between loss and hope, between where we come from and where we're going. 10 years after that fateful day at Boston Common, Amara stood on stage at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. She was the featured soloist for a special concert celebrating refugees who had contributed to American culture. As she played, she looked out at the audience and saw faces of all backgrounds, all stories, all dreams. She saw Sloane in the front row, now older, but still with that fierce love in her eyes. She saw Dashiell, who had become not just a mentor, but a dear friend. She saw Rieu'S, whose documentary had won awards and changed conversations about immigration across the country. And she saw André Rieu'S, now retired but still attending concerts of the musicians he had helped, his face beaming with pride. When the last note faded, Amara spoke into the microphone, something she rarely did during performances. "My father once told me that music needs no passport," she said, her voice clear and strong. Tonight proved him right. We are all connected, not by where we were born, but by what we feel, what we create, what we share. She held up the framed torn paper, now a symbol recognized around the world. "This was my father's gift to me, and my gift to you is this. Never stop asking to be heard. Never stop sharing your voice, because somewhere someone is listening, and that someone might just change your life." The applause was thunderous, but Amara barely heard it. In her heart, she heard something else. Her father's voice, soft and proud, saying what he had always said, "Keep playing, my daughter, keep playing." And she would, for him, for herself, for everyone who ever felt invisible, forever.